Well, hello there. My name is Scott Duffy, and in this tutorial, I'm going to create a brand new Azure virtual machine, Windows virtual machine that you can then use for whatever purpose you want running a Windows server in the cloud. Now, I'm going to use Microsoft Azure. If you don't have an Azure account, Microsoft does have a free account. So you can go to azure.microsoft.com, sign up for free, and they do throw in a $200 credit so you can start to experiment, play with servers and resources for up to 30 days. There are 12 months of extended free services for some of those resources, and there's some resources that are just always free. So go on and get yourself a free account if you don't have one. Now I'm signed into the Azure Portal. That's at portal.azure.com. And you can see here, I've got some resources and I'm incurring some costs here, but that's okay. I want to create a virtual machine. Now, there's a couple ways to do that. There's a menu that across the left, and so I can just go into virtual machines and create it. There's a search box across the top, and I can type in virtual machine, and that'll take me to a screen as well, or I can go into this new tab. I'm going to go into virtual machines. I don't currently have any virtual machines, and I'm going to say create virtual machines. This is a directory of Microsoft's virtual machines, and there are literally hundreds, maybe even 1,000 or more different options to choose from. Different vendors, not just Microsoft, like Red Hat, Canonical, etc., provide images to Microsoft that you can use to start up. Now we're going to create a Windows machine. Microsoft has many different versions of Windows to choose from Windows 2008 up to Windows 2016. You can see here that there are also containers, versions, etc. Okay, so I'm going to create this top one here, Windows 2016 Data Center Edition. Okay, now we're going to create it in the Resource Manager model. If you don't know the difference between Resource Manager and the Classic model, you're going to select Resource Manager. Classic basically it's being deprecated. Resource Managers was introduced a few years ago, and so unless you have legacy resources that are running under the old model, we're going to continue to use Resource Manager model. Now we need to give it a name, so let's call it My First Virtual Machine. Now the first decision that you need to make is what kind of disk storage that virtual machine is going to make. We have the choice between a traditional spinning disk, HDD, or the flash solid state disk. Now the solid state disk is a little bit more expensive, but of course the data accesses are quicker. You also don't have the amount, like the solid state has an upper limit to how much storage you can get, whereas the spinning disk is obviously sometimes in the terabytes and multiple terabytes. I'm going to create a user account. So this is the user that you're going to be using to log into Windows. So you're going to use Windows Remote Desktop. And I'm creating a password for the Windows Remote Desktop as well. It's going under I only have the one subscription, but if you had MSDN or a Visual Studio subscription, or you're part of the Microsoft Spark program, or there's a bunch of other types of programs that provide credits, but I'm just paying for everything that I use. Now, resource group. The real thing about the Azure resource model is that you have to assign resources into a group, and then you can act on those groups. So you can delete them, you can assign security settings, those groups become lumped together, and you can do actions on them as a whole. So I'm going to say AZ new resource group. Also, you need to choose a location. Now, Microsoft currently has 42 regions around the world, and so I can deploy my virtual machine into most of them. Now, you can't deploy into places like China, although they do have a Chinese data center. You need to have an agreement with the Chinese data center. So I wouldn't see China on this list, but there are everything from Korea, Europe, North America, South America, on here. So I'm going to deploy this into Canada. If I do have a Windows Server license, I'm part of a Microsoft agreement, I can obviously allocate one of my licenses, but I don't. Click OK. We're taken to the second blade here. Now, I said we selected the solid state disk, the flash disk. Now we get to choose which type of server. Now, Microsoft has dozens and dozens of options in terms of servers, depending on the data center that you chose. So I chose a Canada data center. My options might be different if you chose an American one or you chose a European one. Different data centers have different options available. I can go with what's recommended, or I can click View All. Okay, I'm going to click View All. So Microsoft does name their instances with these letters, right? So D with a number and underscore v3. So this is the third version of the D series, right? So there's a DV2 and a D, regular D. There's the DV2. It's just an additional types of hardware. This is a most modern version of the D series. If you're willing to use some older one, you can probably save a little bit of money. We can see the dollar amounts that are attached here. For the purposes of this demonstration, this server's not going to live for very long, so I can just choose one that, again, you're paying by the minute essentially. So if I chose, let's see, if I chose this DS11 or DS2, that's the average monthly charge. It's around $6 a day, but again, it's not going to live for a day in reality with this demonstration. This one comes with 2 virtual CPUs, 7 gigabytes of accessible memory. I can have up to 8 data disks, etc., etc. 14 gigabytes of local storage. So we'll choose that one. Now, when it's asking about availability set, Microsoft recommends if availability is a concern of yours, then you're going to need to run more than one of these servers. Okay, so you're going to need 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 servers in order to make sure your application stays up during the most critical times. Sometimes Microsoft runs updates against their stuff. Recently, Intel was hacked, and so CPUs need to be updated with new operating system code. So sometimes it's unavoidable to bring a server down. So if you have more than one, then you can mitigate that. I'm not going to run this in availability set. Microsoft has this manage disk option. So if I was to say no, then I'm going to create disks and I'm going to have to then reserve an amount of space, etc., etc. Manage disks, Microsoft manages the backups. They manage, I'll put my mouse over here. They already manage the availability of the disk. And so I think it's really, things are moving towards this manage disk option. Of course, it's a little bit, it becomes scalable when Microsoft manages it. If you say no, then you manage the scaling. Every resource must be on a network, of course. So it's going to create a brand new virtual network because I have a new resource group. It's going to create a brand new virtual network for this server to run, brand new subnet, a brand new public IP address, and a brand new security group. So all of these will be attached to the network on which the server runs. Now, if I wanted to have extensions, like there's automation, etc., then I could add extensions to it. I won't. Auto shutdown. This is if you're using this for testing purposes, which we are, then I can say shut down at 7 o'clock every day. So if this machine is running by 7 p.m., it'll shut down. I can pick my time zone here. I'm in Eastern. So by 7 p.m. tonight, this machine will shut itself down. Do I want notification? No. Monitoring, that makes sense. Your DevOps and IT pros are going to want some information on this. This gets logged into a storage account. There's a storage account associated with this. And now Microsoft actually has a backup option on the creation step. This is relatively new. I'm not going to touch it. So Microsoft's going to give me the summary here of this server that I'm about to create. We'll give it a second. It's important to remember, so this is 24 cents Canadian per hour, which is not bad, I guess, for having a server for a short period of time. Important to remember that this is the price for the virtual machine. Storage has its own price. And so when you're creating a virtual machine, you're creating a virtual hard disk, VHD, that supports it. That VHD goes into your storage account, And so even if the virtual machine is not running, you're going to be charged for the storage. But this cost is only for the cost you're using it while it's running. If I click the create button, then I'm going to end up with a virtual machine. It will take about 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to let it do that. And when we come back to this video, we're going to have a running virtual machine. All right, so we can see here that the virtual machine has been created. It is a standard DS2 v2 as we requested, with 2 vCPUs and 7 gigabytes of memory. Azure has assigned it a public IP address. You'll recall that we did not actually request a specific IP address. You can't request a specific IP address when you're creating a virtual machine, but Microsoft has pulled one of their IP addresses out of their pool and assigned it to us as a public IP address. So we can connect to this box using this IP address. If we wanted to give this machine a domain name, we could go into here, configure it, and it will be based on the public IP address. We can call it, it's something.canadaeastcloudapp.azure.com. So my first VM.canadaeastcloudapp.com. Okay. And I'll save that. And so now I can access this IP address, which is the server, by its IP address and also by a fully qualified domain name. So let's connect to this box, right? So the box is running. I'm going to click. Now there's a couple ways I can do this. Now that I have an IP address, I can open Windows Remote Desktop and I can just put the IP address in there and connect to it. The domain name that I created, my first VM, Canada East, etc. Or Microsoft provides this convenient connect button right up here at the top left. So I click connect and you'll notice that it downloads the RDP file to my local machine. So I just simply need to run this and Windows Remote Desktop will start and it will automatically try to connect to the same IP address. Now I do need to approve it and it will try. Remember that when we created the virtual machine, we created a specific user ID and password. So it's not using our Windows credentials from our local. It's going to use this user ID and password. Now I have logged into this to test it, so it's remembering that. But what you'll find is it'll try to log you in as your Windows user that you're using your computer as, and you're going to have to go and say more choices and enter a specific user ID and password. So I'm going to enter the user ID and password that I created and say OK. Now it's asking me security if this certificate is valid because it hasn't seen it before. I'm going to say yes. I can also click the box saying don't ask me again for this computer, but I'll just click yes. And now when you log in to this box for the first time, it's going to need to create, just like in any Windows, it hasn't seen you before. It's going to create a user profile for you, so there's a little bit of a startup. But look how quick this sort of comes up. Now, what we need to do is we need to go into Server Manager. Now, it might start automatically for you, so when a machine is just booted for the first time, Server Manager pops up, and you'll see here the way that you modify a server for usage is using roles. Okay, so I'm going to say add role here, and a little wizard pops up, and I can say okay, next, role based. I want this machine. And now these are the list. I know it's hard to see here, but the list of possible roles for this machine. So it can be a DNS server, DHCP server, an Active Directory server. I want this to be a web server. Okay, so I click web server and it asks me to install the IS Management Console. Of course, I need IS Management Console. That makes sense. So click next. Now, if I wanted to, I could add more features to this. So SMTP server, FTP server, Telnet server. You might, if you're using this server for a real purpose, you might need to get in here and set all the features of it. But this is just a demo for me, and so I'm going to use the default installation. You can see here for the web services, I can choose things like, let's see, HTTP logging, redirection, web dev. IS client URL redirection. So we don't have to really touch any of this by default. So these are just sort of the role services. And I'm going to click install. And so Windows is going to do all of the things that's needed here to make this a web server. One of the things that it does is it actually modifies the firewall. So there is a firewall on this Windows machine, just like in any Windows machine. And it restricts traffic that comes into the box from external. Now, until the IS role is installed, then web traffic, so if I said inbound rules, let's see, I want to say enabled, yes. So by default, there's no rule that allows port 80 or port 443, which is the web traffic. When this installation of the role completes, it's going to insert a new rule for the Windows Firewall for 80 and 443. Here's 443, secure socket tunneling. So once this is complete, it's going to be enabled. Right now it's not enabled. And basically traffic is going to be allowed to come into the server. So that's one thing we need to do to make sure that we can address this as a web server. Okay. So you can see here that it's got the files role and an IS role. Now, I'm going to close this down. I'm actually going to disconnect from this machine. Click disconnect. And one thing I need to do is I need to make sure that traffic can travel to the machine. So you'll see here, a virtual machine is part of a subnet. Subnet's part of a virtual network. So I'm going to go into the subnet here. And so there's the subnets default. Every subnet has a network security group. This one, let's see, it must inherit it from its parent. So the first VM has got a network interface. Network interface has a network security group. So there's a my first VM network security group. And you'll see here inside of the network security group, these are basically the firewall settings inside of Azure. We had Windows Firewall, which was software based. This is also software based, but it's outside of the machine. This is the network. Now, by default, it allows RDP traffic. So puts port 3389. It allows virtual networks, which are VPNs, and it allows load balancers, and then it denies everything else, right? So you'll see the inbound security rules for this network is pretty restrictive. It just allows one thing from the outside, which is RDP traffic, which is we already proven when we tried remote desktop, it worked. Well, what we want to do is we want to add security rule. I'm going to say from outside, we want to add, I'm going to choose the basic one. And in the basic one, I can choose HTTP traffic from the drop down. And I'm going to say, yes, I want HTTP. And let's see, it's updating here. So you'll see here, given priority 100. Rules are executed from lowest number to highest. So priority 100 is, in this case, the first rule that'll be evaluated. We also want to allow HTTPS traffic. So I'm going to go up to here and I'm going to say HTTPS. That is, the rules have to be unique. So I'm going to put this as priority 101, and that's port 443. And so now I've added two rules to the firewall that will allow this traffic through the firewall. Okay. Now, if we go back to our virtual machines, I'm just going to go this way to it. You'll see here that I'm going to copy the IP address. And I'm going to open a new tab on my browser here. And with that IP address, I'm going to navigate to the web browser. So this has traveled from my computer over the Microsoft Azure network into that virtual machine that we created. and it's now serving up the default web page that IIS gives when you don't have anything there. So in this video, we have successfully created a new virtual machine, created it as a web server specifically, and proven that we're able to get to it. Now, I do have a number of courses on Udemy that are relating to Microsoft Azure. Now, so if you're interested in the absolute basics of Azure and cloud computing, I have a course that is the starting and beginning course for Microsoft Azure. Now, if you do have some experience or you're interested in getting certified as Microsoft Azure, I have a number of certification courses that'll, at the end of that, and you take the test and pass it, you will be able to call yourself Microsoft Azure certified. Passing 2 of these exams, you can call yourself an MCSA, and if you pass all 3 of these exams, you'll be called an MCSE. So for instance, the 7535 exam for architecting Microsoft Azure. Again, available on Udemy. The link is in the description. I recommend you checking it out. There's already almost 25,000 students in this course, and so it's the most popular course online having to do with Microsoft Azure, as far as I know. So check it out. And again, if you want to get the basics, there's one for you too. So come over to my Udemy landing page, check out my courses, and perhaps you'll find something that's interesting to you.